A most original and creative talent in our business. Would you welcome Mr. Orson Welles?
Ladies and gentlemen, Orson Welles again, come to call for another visit.
Good evening. This is Orson Welles.
Stay tuned.
Right after this episode.
For our discussion.
This is Orson Welles speaking. This is usually a program of opinion. Most Sundays, it's a radio argument on some side of a political issue. These days, there's plenty of raw material for an editorialist, but just for today, just for this 15 minutes of today, we'll forget the headlines. Indeed, we'll leave the news section safely hidden under the gaudy reassurances of the comic strips and turn for this 1/4 of an hour to the library. We've done it before. Every so often, we've changed our pace with a ghost story or a fairy tale, and since many of your letters have requested another such detour into the bookshelf, today let's keep the Sabbath with a sermon. This sermon was written by Herman Melville, and you'll find it in the pages of his greatest novel, which is certainly the greatest novel ever written in America. Last week on the Mercury's dramatic program, we did a half hour of that grand sea tragedy, Moby Dick. And in checking the script with the book, we mourned the necessity of cutting out the best part of it all because that best part doesn't directly bear on the plot. But Father Mapple's sermon in the little Nantucket Whalers Church has much to say to you who are listening to my voice. And for the owner of this voice, here is a preachment with a very sharp and special and direct application. You won't be wasting your time to hear this out, and as for your obedient servant, it ought to do him whole oceans of good to read it aloud. From chapters 7, 8, and 9 of Melville's Moby Dick. In New Bedford, there stands a whaleman's chapel, and few are the moody fishermen shortly bound for the Indian Ocean or Pacific who fail to make a Sunday visit to the spot. I'm sure that I did not. I had not been seated in the chapel very long ere a man of a certain venerable robustness entered. It was the famous Father Mapple, so called by the whalemen, among whom he was a very great favorite. He had been a sailor and harpooner in his youth, but for many years past had dedicated his life to the ministry. He quietly approached the pulpit. Halting for an instant at the foot of the ladder, he cast a look upwards, and then with a truly sailor-like but still not unreverential dexterity, hand over hand, mounted the steps as if ascending the main top of his vessel. Nor was the pulpit itself without a trace of some sea taste. Its paneled front was in the likeness of a ship's bluff bows, and the Holy Bible rested on a projecting piece of scrollwork fashioned after a ship's fiddle-headed beak. What could be more full of meaning? Yes, the world's a ship on its passage out, and not a voyage complete, and the pulpit is its prow. Nearly all joined in singing a hymn which swelled high above the howling of the storm outside. Then a brief pause ensued. The preacher slowly turned over the leaves of the Bible, and at last, folding his hand down upon the proper page, said, "Beloved shipmates, clinch the last verse of the first chapter of Jonah. And God had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah." Shipmates, what is the lesson that the book of Jonah teaches? Shipmates, it is a two-stranded lesson, a lesson to us all as sinful men, and a lesson to me as a pilot. As with all sinners among men, the sin of this Jonah was in his willful disobedience of the command of God. And with this sin of disobedience in him, Jonah still further flouts at God by seeking to flee from him. He thinks that a ship made by men will carry him into countries where God does not reign, but only the captains of this earth. He skulks about the wharves of Joppa and seeks a ship that's bound for Tarshish. See ye not then, shipmates, that Jonah sought to flee worldwide from God, O miserable man, most contemptible and worthy of all scorn, with slouched hat and guilty eye, skulking from his God, prowling among the shipping like a vile burglar, hastening to cross the seas, so disordered, self-condemning in his look that there had been a policeman in those days, Jonah, on the mere suspicion of something wrong, had been arrested ere he touched a deck. How plainly he's a fugitive. No baggage, not a hat box, valise, nor carpet bag. No friends accompany him to the wharf, and with their fond farewells see him as the ship goes off. At last, after much dodging search, Jonah finds the Tarshish ship, receiving the last items of her cargo, and as he steps on board to see its captain in the cabin, all the sailors for the moment desist from hoisting in the goods to mark the stranger's evil eye. "Who's there?" cries the captain at his busy desk, hurriedly making out his papers for the customs. I seek a passage in the ship to Tarshish. How soon sail ye, sir?" With the coming tide, says the captain. I'll sail with you, says Jonah. The passage money, how much is that? I'll pay now. For it is particularly written, shipmates, as if it were a thing not to be overlooked in this history, that he paid the fare thereof ere the craft did sail. Now Jonah's captain, shipmates, was one of those whose discernment detects crime in any, but whose cupidity exposes it only in the penniless. In this world, shipmates, sin that pays its way can travel freely and without a passport, whereas virtue, if a pauper, is stopped at all frontiers. So Jonah's captain prepares to test the length of Jonah's purse ere he judge him openly. He charges him thrice the usual sum, and it's assented to. Then the captain knows that Jonah is a fugitive, but at the same time resolves to help a flight that paves its rear with gold. All dressed and dusty as he is, Jonah throws himself into his berth and finds the little stateroom ceiling almost resting on his forehead. The air is close, and Jonah gasps. Then in that contracted hole, sunk too beneath the ship's waterline, Jonah feels the heralding presentiment of that stifling hour when the whale shall hold him in the smallest of his bowel's wards. And at last, amid the whirl of woe, he feels a deep stupor steals over Jonah as over the man who bleeds to death. For conscience is the wound, and there's naught to stanch it. So after sore wrestling in his berth, Jonah's prodigy of ponderous misery drags him drowning down to sleep. And now the time of the tide is come. The ship casts off her cables, and from the deserted wharf, the unsheared ship for Tarshish, all careening, glides to sea. That ship, my friends, was the first of recorded smugglers. The contraband was Jonah. But the sea rebels. He will not bear the wicked burden. A dreadful storm comes up. The sea is like to break the ship. But now when the boatswain calls all hands to lighten her, when boxes, bales, and jars are clattering overboard, when the wind is shrieking and the men are yelling, and every plank thunders with trampling feet right over Jonah's head, in all this raging tumult, Jonah sleeps his hideous sleep. He sees no black sea, no raging sky, feels not the reeling timbers, and little hears he or heeds he the far rush of the mighty whale, which even now with open mouth is cleaving the seas after him. Aye, shipmates, Jonah was gone down into the sides of the ship, but the frighted master comes to him and shrieks in his dead ear, "What meanest thou? O sleeper, arise!" Jonah staggers to his feet and, stumbling to the deck, grasps for shroud to look upon the sea. And ever as the white moon shows her affrighted face from the steep gullies in the blackness overhead, aghast, Jonah sees the rearing bowsprit pounding high upward and soon beat downward again toward the tormented deep. Terrors upon terrors run shouting through his soul. In all his cringing attitudes, the god fugitive is now too plainly known. The sailors mark him. "I am a Hebrew," he cries. "I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who hath made the sea and the dry land." And then the wretched Jonah cries out to them to take him and cast him forth into the sea, for he knew that for his argument and his sake this great tempest was upon them. And now behold Jonah taken up as an anchor and dropped into the sea, when instantly an oily calmness flouts out from the east, and the sea is still, as Jonah carries down the gale with him, leaving smooth water behind. He goes down in the whirling heart of such a masterless commotion that he scarce heeds the moment when he drops, seething into the yawning jaws awaiting him. And the whale shoots too, all his ivory teeth like so many white bolts upon his prison. Then Jonah prayed unto the Lord out of the fish's belly. But observe his prayer and learn a weighty lesson. For sinful as he is, Jonah does not weep and wail for direct deliverance. He feels that his dreadful punishment is just. He leaves all his deliverance to God, contenting himself with this, that spite of all his pains and pangs, he will still look towards his holy temple. And here, shipmates, is true and faithful repentance, not clamorous for pardon, but grateful for punishment. And how pleasing to God was this conduct in Jonah is shown in the eventual deliverance of him from the sea and from the whale. Shipmates, I do not place Jonah before you to be copied for his sin, but I do place him before you as a model for repentance. Sin not, but if you do, take heed to repent of it, like Jonah. Shipmates, God has laid but one hand upon you. Both his hands press upon me. I have read ye by what murky light may be mine, the lesson that Jonah teaches to all sinners, and therefore to ye, and still more to me. For I am a greater sinner than ye. And now how gladly would I come down from this masthead and sit on the hatches there where ye sit, and listen as you listen, while some of you reads me that other and more awful lesson, which Jonah teaches to me as a pilot. How, being an anointed pilot prophet, or speaker of true things, and bidden by the Lord to sound those unwelcome truths in the ears of a wicked Nineveh, Jonah, appalled at the hostility he should raise, fled from his mission and sought to escape his duty and his God by taking ship at Joppa. But God is everywhere. Tarshish he never reached. As we have seen, God came upon him in the whale and swallowed him down to living gulfs of doom, and with swift slantings tore him along into the midst of the seas, where the eddying depths sucked him 10,000 fathoms down, and the weeds were wrapped about his head, and all the watery world of woe bowled over him. Yet even then, beyond the reach of any plummet, out of the belly of hell, when the whale grounded upon the ocean's utmost bones, even then, God heard the engulfed, repenting prophet when he cried. Then God spake unto the fish, and from the shuddering cold and blackness of the sea, the whale came breaching up towards the warm and pleasant sun and all the delights of air and earth, and vomited out Jonah upon the dry land. And when the word of the Lord came a second time, and Jonah, bruised and beaten, his ears like two seashells, still multitudinously murmuring of the ocean, Jonah did the Almighty's bidding. And what was that, shipmate? To preach the truth to the face of falsehood. That was it. This, shipmates, this is that other lesson. And woe to that pilot of the living God who slights it. Woe to him whom this world charms from the gospel duty. Woe to him who seeks to pour oil upon the waters when God has brewed them into a gale. Woe to him who seeks to please rather than to appall. Woe to him whose good name is more to him than goodness. Woe to him in this world courts not dishonor. Woe to him who, as the great pilot Paul has it, while preaching to others, is himself a castaway. But, oh, shipmates, on the starboard hand of every woe, there is sure delight, and higher than the top of that delight, than the bottom of the woe is deep, is not the main truck higher than the kelson is low. Delight is to him a far, far upward and inward delight, who against the proud gods and commodores of this earth ever stands forth his own inexorable self. Delight is to him whose strong arms yet support him when the ship of this base, treacherous world is gone down. Delight is to him who gives no quarter in the truth, and kills, burns, and destroys all sin, though he pluck it out from under the robes of senators and judges. Delight, top gallant delight is to him who acknowledges no law or lord, but the Lord his God, and who is only a patriot to heaven. Delight is to him whom all the waves of the billows of the seas of the boisterous mob can never shake from this sure keel of ages, and eternal delight and deliciousness will be his who, coming to lay him down, can say with his final breath, O Father, chiefly known to me by thy rod, mortal or immortal, here I die. I have striven to be thine, more than to be this world's or mine own. Yet this is nothing. I leave eternity to thee. For what is man that he should live out the lifetime of his God? Ladies and gentlemen, I've read to you from chapters 7, 8, and 9 of Melville's Moby Dick. Please let me come to call next week at this same time. Till then, I remain, as always, obediently yours.
This is ABC, the American Broadcasting Company.
Well, hello again. This is Buck Benny speaking. Welcome to another Orson Welles Commentaries. We're reaching the end here. We have about a month left of shows. This one is a really unique one and different than probably every other one I can think of, because he's read from the Bible before a lot and things like that, but this is actually reading from a book, and the book is Moby Dick. And so he'll explain a little bit, and we'll talk about it too, about why he's reading from Moby Dick and things. He also will mention that he did on his Mercury Summer Theater, that he presented a version of Moby Dick as well. And we will connect that up as well. So you'll hear the commentary. Well, you'll hear us talk about it, then you'll hear the commentary, then you'll hear the actual episode of the Summer Theater, because they tie together so well. And having said that, let's fly over here to Vincent and have Vincent point out anything that he noticed from either. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to start by giving a little background on Wells's infatuation and adaptations of Moby Dick. Like most classical literature, Welles is well versed in this story. He adapted it many times. First time is a radio version, an hour-long radio version in 1938, and then he had this 30-minute version, sort of like 30 minutes plus 15, so like 45 if you add the commentary with the Mercury Summer Theater on the air. His other forays with this particular work, though, are a little strange. So in 1955, he was in John Huston's movie Moby Dick, and he actually played the role of the preacher, which he reads from here, and that's basically the only part of the movie he's in. So he recites this basically same thing. I think it's slightly adapted. In 1956, he made this meta play about a theater troupe that is making Moby Dick. It's called Moby Dick Rehearsed. And it is partially filmed. They were going to make like not a filmed version of it, but they were just filming the play itself. Many theater historians, including Wells's longtime biographer, Simon Callow, believe this to be like the greatest work of theater ever done. I won't go that strongly, but I will say it is very interesting. So it is worth checking out. Moby Dick Rehearsed is the name of it. The script is available online. And then Welles also planned to make a Moby Dick film in 1971, which he never finished. So this is one of the many classical works of literature that Welles returns to constantly throughout his life in various ways. And that's not unusual. I think what I want to mention, though, is, again, what is Welles doing? Why is he reading from Moby Dick instead of giving political commentary? Because he begins this episode by saying, oh, there's plenty happening in politics, but we're not going to do that. And again, he couches it in this desire for people to hear stories or read from the Bible. His show is, he knows at this point, I believe, that his show is getting canceled. It's getting taken off the air. Again, we mentioned last episode in Cleveland. And I mentioned how African-American communities were banding together to try to stop the show getting taken off in Cleveland. The fervor behind this seems to be spreading, though. There was an article in the Hollywood Reporter at this time where it notes, quote, several organizations, which I presume to be not particularly African-American in this context, but it mentions thousands of protesters trying to get his show back on. And it also mentions a common theme, which they always do, which is the loads of mail being sent to the radio station. And I will say that across different newspapers, across different writers, they always mention that the letters were almost all well written. It seems to be like the common thing that they all say. I don't know if that's just because they hear the letters on the air, or maybe they're getting some shared with them, or maybe it's just this common idea that a Wellesian audience is well educated, but they always mention some iteration of that. But Welles is busy doing other things. I mentioned the film. He's in the process of having a fundraising campaign to fight Southern racism, which he's organizing with Joe Lewis. He's back together with his estranged wife, Rita Hayworth. So he's sort of rekindling his domestic family life because they have a kid together. And he also wrote what I think is not the only, but the second, he only wrote two, as far as I can tell, book reviews. One was for this theater history book before this. and he wrote a book review for William Gresham's Nightmare Alley, which appeared strangely in Variety. It was a very strange review, and I can't even read. I tried to excerpt it, but it doesn't make any sense to me. And so if you want to read a strange review, probably the weirdest review I've ever read, check it out. Nightmare Alley, written by Orson Welles. He apparently is just trying to do a bunch of random things. So he's doing that, and he reads from Moby Dick, and it's quite entertaining, and I hope you'll enjoy it.
Well, let me ask you a question, Vincent, actually. So he did 2 versions of Moby Dick then on radio. The version that we're the one we were going to play, and we still are going to play, I don't believe he plays. He sort of directs it, but he doesn't. Is he even a character in there or not? I can't remember.
I don't believe so.
I don't think so.
Maybe a little bit. I mean, yeah, exactly. Kathy says sound effects, maybe.
No,
But
I mean,
yeah.
maybe he's the whale. So,
But what about the
oh yeah,
the earlier
whale.
version, the hour-long
Yeah.
version? I assume he plays a part in that.
Yeah, I believe. I'm forgetting. I didn't listen to it in preparation for this.
Right.
But I think he's also the pastor in that. If he's not Captain Ahab, he's
Okay.
one of the main roles. Knowing Wells, he's probably Captain Ahab.
That's what I would think. I was
Um,
surprised when he wasn't Captain Ahab in this version. So I think what I'm going to do this on the fly. I don't really have any length that has to be. So I think what we'll do is we'll play the commentary, then we'll play the half-hour version, and then I'll link on the hour version. If people want to listen to all that, they can, or fast forward through whatever they want and listen to the pieces. But it might be kind of nice to have all of that together in one place. So we'll just go ahead and do that. If that's assuming I can find a copy of Moby Dick, the hour-long version, but I'm pretty sure I can. So anyway, with that being said, let's flip over to Kathy and get her thoughts on any of this so far, and then we'll have Terry bring us home again like he usually does.
and I know he will. I got to be one of the rare. I dropped my English major before, and I'm not even sure. No, I dropped my English major before the course that would have read Moby Dick, and it's always intimidated me by its very long side. It's 80 pages. Someday, maybe I will someday I will take the time to read it, because I hear, I understand it's one of those things I really, really need to read. So I'm fascinated by Orson's almost obsession with it, how he goes back to it again and again and again. And I just find the idea of a 30-minute Moby Dick to be a little silly, but great. How to make it accessible to wider audiences, to want to draw them in to an incredible story. I'm proud of him and happy for him.
Right.
So
well, and I'll throw out there just a plug for Patrick Stewart, who plays Xavier in X-Men and also plays Captain Picard in Star Trek. Did a really nice version. I think it was for like on an AMC or TCM or something like that a number of years ago, and I know it's available. So it's a multiple hour version of it that I think is well worth someone's time to search out and watch that. So I would highly suggest that. But I too haven't read the whole thing. I've had it here. I think I read the first 100 pages or so and then kind of gave up on it because there's a lot to read in that. So, and you only have so much time. So it's like, what am I going to do? Terry, go ahead with. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, Terry, you're good. What do you think?
Well, first, I want to build on something that Kathy said. I worked for a woman who was either an English major or an American Lit major, and she, as Wells says in this commentary, believed that Moby Dick was not just the greatest American novel ever written, but the greatest novel ever written, and it informed her management style. It was really interesting.
Yeah.
But I decided to go to the source. As I listened to the commentary, I read along, and it was interesting to me the edits that Wells made to the novel. And so there's very little from chapters 7 and 8. Mostly this is chapter 9. And even within chapter 9, he jumps around a lot. He does an excellent job of editing this for radio. It reads, I think, very smoothly, as our listeners will hear. I also decided to go to another bit of source material. I read my copy of Inherit the Wind, and there's a reference in the trial section to the Jonah and the whale story, and that's how the Clarence Darrow character called Henry Drummond in the play refers to it. He's interrogating his opposing counsel on the stand, and he says, so this story about Jonah and the whale, and the other character, being a biblical scholar, says actually it was a big fish, and he is holding what he calls his book in his hand, and he opens it up and he says, well, actually it said great fish, not big fish. It's picking over details here. So having read Moby Dick, I decided, because I really wish John Henderson were here today, because he knows more about his book than the four of us combined.
Yeah.
But I had not read the chapter of Jonah, which is sandwiched in neatly between Obadiah and Micah. It's only 4 chapters long. And it's fascinating to me how this story is much more than the bumper sticker version of the prophet being swallowed by a whale. It's a fascinating story. And I won't go into it now, but I will recommend it to our listeners and to the 3 of you as you listen to this dramatization of this sermon from Moby Dick about the underlying story, and the character of Father Mapple, who is the preacher Wells portrays here, is masterful. I mean, it's really an amazing improvement in some ways. May my English teachers forgive me, on the original novel. Then finally, I want to point out a reference in the novel, and as presented by Wells, of sackcloth and ashes. And that's a reference to great suffering, and an expression of great suffering in biblical times. And that, of course, made me think of the Tom Lehrer song, We'll All Go Together When We Go, in which he says, no more ashes, no more sackcloth, just an armband made of black cloth.
Made of black cloth, yeah.
So, all these things swirling around, brilliantly evoked by this amazing, amazing performance by Orson Welles.
For sure.
Except for one last little detail, I couldn't believe it. Orson Welles, for all of his experience on the radio, begins by clearing his throat. And I don't know whether that was broadcast or if it was just on the recording, but, being an old radio hand myself, didn't he have a cough switch? I mean, couldn't he? I didn't understand that. Why did that happen? Weird.
Well,
The same thing.
Prince did it in a video to show that the video is sort of kind of live or whatever.
Yeah.
In the video, maybe he was doing that. Maybe he was, or maybe Prince was an homage to Orson. I don't know. But the other thing, I was thinking about this, and this is getting on the meta level or whatever. But I was thinking, I wondered a little bit if Orson was doing Moby Dick and had this focus on Moby Dick, just in that his work on the Isaac Woodard situation, and where he kept focusing on that for so long, and in the same way that Ahab was focusing on getting the whale to his own detriment at some point. This was to the detriment of his, I think it drove his show getting canceled, and him a lot of issues that he was having. So was that his white whale? I don't know, but interesting. And to the end, which is I don't think it's mentioned in this one. I think it's in one of our ones from the future that we're going to hit here next, the next couple. But he again talks about Isaac Woodward, and he refuses to use the correct. You would think by now, he's 7 weeks in or whatever, he would know the guy's name. But anyway, whatever. I also think in this, it's interesting in that this episode felt to me like, okay, he's finally pulling back and going, okay, I better chill my heels here and just kind of do something that's non-political And I thought, okay, maybe we'll get some less political shows here for a while as the end of this run. Well, next week and the week after, boy, he completely turns on the political engines and afterburners again, and in a different direction than he's gone, but still he's right back to it. So I don't know what the deal was here, if it was just a reprieve while he did some research or something, but whatever.
And yet it's could be so deeply what he's feeling that he feels he must tell the truth. He must preach, you know, God's word, no matter what the consequences are. If he would lose his show or get vilified in the South or get, you know, lose other kinds of things. So
Right.
yes, so it's not political, but I bet it could easily be read as still, political. So
Oh yeah, for sure. And Terry was sharing something in the chat. You want to talk about?
It's something between Vincent and me. It's nothing that you need to share with them.
Okay, nothing we need to share. It's private audience, so let's leave that alone. And at one point, Vincent was sharing that maybe there wasn't an hour version or something. I tend to remember that there was at some point, so I'll search for it. It might, because it could be in Campbell's Playhouse. It could be in.
Well, since you brought it up,
Theater.
Daryl, that's what that article was that I shot over to Vincent. It's a link to.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm not sure. I checked other sources and I don't see it listed. So
okay, we'll see if it's
there.
If it's there and we have it, I'll connect it up. If it's not, well, you'll at least get the half-hour version, if nothing else, of Orson and Moby Dick. Oh, and I thought I'd say one last thing about the Moby Dick version that he did for radio. This half-hour version of it. He says at the beginning of it, it comes from a record set that they released. So I think this is just a presentation of the record. I don't think this is that they re-recorded it. It sounds like it's just he had the record and had the rights or whatever and just went ahead and did it as a show. So that's kind of different. And that's probably why he's not on it, is he wasn't on the record, of course. So anyway, we'll leave it at that. And I hope you're going to enjoy this. Really different Orson, very enjoyable Orson. So have some fun with this one, and we'll see you guys next time. And